of Israel. But let's step back because I want the American people to kind of take this in for a second. Just imagine that here the Israelis woke up and communities were bombarded, families were murdered, women and children were taken hostage, dragged through the streets, the elderly were taken. All of this has happened in front of everyone, on top of thousands of rockets that hit Israel. This should be personal for every woman and man in America. Why? Because when they did this surprise attack, when they took these hostages, when they murdered these families, they were celebrating. And what were they celebrating? They were saying death to Israel, death to America. This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America because they hate us just as much. And what we have to understand is this is the reason that we have to unite around making sure our enemies do not hurt our friends. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends, just like we needed them on 9/11. That's why Ukraine needs us when Russia's doing this. That's why Israel needs us when Hamas and Iran are doing this. And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them.
The Hamas forces are believed to have brought multiple Israeli captives back into Gaza. Do you know anything about that? What can you report at this stage? All right. Yumna, please take cover. If you are in a position to do so safely, you can explain to us what we're happening. If you are not in a position to do so safely, then please get to safety.
No, it's okay. This is a missile attack on Palestine Tower, right in the middle of Gaza City.
Yumna, take a moment to breathe. Take a moment, you and your team. Take a moment to breathe, okay? Just take a moment as we are looking at this picture. We are hours into this war between Gaza.
من المسؤولين الإسرائيليين خلال الأيام الماضية.
ما تم دافع.
رجعني بشدور.
ما أنت بشدور.
ما تم دافع.
ما تم דווח. לא מעניין אותי אם אתה בשידור.
מדווח מה אומר דובר צה"ל.
מה אומר דובר צה"ל? מקווה מאוד שאתם אומרים דברים טובים. הבנת אותי? מקווה מאוד שאתם אומרים דברים טובים וכל החמאס האלה צריכים לשחוט אותם. הבנת אותי? כי אם אתם לא תלכו את האמת, אוי ואבוי לכם.
الآن لمراسلنا أحمد راوشة خلال مشاركته معنا على الهواء من أسدود. ما الذي كان يقوله لك أحمد؟
عناصر من الشرطة الإسرائيلية يحاولون أو يراقبون ما الذي نتحدث، وخرج مرة واحدة للصراخ بهذه الطريقة وللتهديد بطبيعة الحال.
تهديد جديد للطواقم الصحفية كما نرى على الشاشة. عنصر من الشرطة الإسرائيلية يتدخل أثناء مشاركة زميلنا أحمد راوشة معنا على الهواء من أسدود. ليس هذا بالطبع هو التدخل
طبعا هو مسلح
الأول.
يحمل مسدس. طبعا هو مسلح بطبيعة الحال. الآن ذهبوا من هذه المنطقة لكنه كان مسلحا وكان معه عناصر مسلحون داخل السيارة.
There are no ambulances, only Palestinian civilians helping other civilians. This is obviously another child.
طابوش خلص حبيبي خلص مفيش حاجة خلص طابوش
قمر شامل انا الشباب هجيتها الصبح هي تجي لقينا كل شيء مضمن. ايش مرعب ايش مرعب حرام.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Alex with Reporterfy Media. We have quite the lineup tonight. We have Brian Berletic from the New Atlas. We have Angelo Giuliano on board and Carl Zaw on tonight's program. I thought it would be fit to start off with the program with quoting a good friend of mine and a friend of the show's, Daniel Dumbro, who tweeted out a tweet yesterday on his Twitter post. I'll read the following quote from Daniel to give us some understanding and reflection. When folks raising the alarm on the suffering of Palestinian civilians are asked to first condemn Hamas' October 7th attack, it is a rhetorical strategy designed to undermine empathy for Palestinians by adding some level of justification for their destruction. It also meant to create a false framework to lead audiences to believe this conflict began with the October 7th attacks, without which Palestinians would somehow no longer be killed, oppressed and displaced by Israel. Absolutely no one invited onto the mainstream media to discuss the brutal October 7th attacks are required to first condemn the killing, oppression, and displacement of Palestinians, people carried out before the October 7th attacks by Israel. Double standards like these are just one of the many tools deployed to satisfy a bias and or disdain toward ordinary Palestinian people while pretending to be fair and intellectually honest. Those are very important words for this day and time. I'm going to bring on to the panel Carl Zaw. Thank you for joining the panel, Carl. And thank you for joining the panel, everyone. We have Angelo and Brian on the program tonight. Gentlemen, I have seen some stuff across the media screens that I have never saw before. I've had discussions with family members and friends for the last 2 weeks. The world is now standing up, talking about this, hitting the streets in pretty much every nation's, and some countries, even as today, are breaking diplomatic ties with Israel. Who would like to start off this show to try to give this audience an understanding on really what's going on in the Middle East?
Well, just as we speak, this happened yesterday. Israel just hit the largest refugee camp in Gaza. And CNN put the title as the largest refugee camp in Gaza was hit. There was a blast hitting the refugee camp in Gaza as if like this is a natural occurrence. And I think the tide is changing because even mainstream media like Wolf Blitzer and Piers Morgan are now saying that's unacceptable. I think that the people in Washington, the ruling circles, they don't realize this, that they're still sticking to, we got to stand by Israel no matter what. Like, Genocide Nikki was saying in your opening clip, she said, like, this should be personal to Americans attacking Israel. Like, why? Why should it be personal to Americans? This happens half the world away. And post after post shows younger generations do not, in fact, stand with Israel. So we're seeing finally a changing attitude now, I think.
A gentleman join in any time.
Angelo,
you want to go? Yeah. Well, I think what is important to see, it's especially the wording of the media. You see just small details. Whenever it's Palestinian dies, when it's Israeli is killed. It's all in the details, and that's how they frame. But here, what we have is we can see the double standards clearly, especially when you compare what happened in Ukraine and what happened in Palestine, in Gaza. In Ukraine, when you had barely buildings, having barely scratches on the building, they would call for the biggest crimes against humanity. And here you have completely acceptance of bombing civilian populations. Not only civilian populations, we are talking about no discrimination, children, women, hospitals, and you have actually officials saying that this is about inflicting general punishment. and inflicting as much damage as possible. It's a collective punishment, and this goes really against any morality. I don't recall something so brutal. But I don't know what is the most shocking, the act in itself, or the Western elites and the Western media. And what we see here is a clear disconnections between those elites and the population. And I think it's getting very dangerous, especially when you look at Europe. You have countries like France. France has the largest Muslim population in Europe, and also the largest Jewish population in Europe. And this could create long-term big clashes. Again, I think that there's also a topic that maybe we could touch is inconsistencies, a lot of questions mark. Why now? We have a normalization of relationship between Israel and the Arab world. You have Netanyahu, who has problems, internal problems. And we have also maybe this as an off-ramp because the NATO and the collective West is losing in Ukraine. So lots of question marks. And also this whole thing about intelligence failure. Remember, 9/11 was also about intelligence failure. And we found out many years later that maybe it was not intelligence failure. Maybe they closed an eye because it was convenient.
Yeah, maybe I'll build on what Angelo was just saying about the timing of the Hamas October 7th raid, and then this whole crisis that has unfolded ever since. And I just want to make it clear that if you condemn certain aspects of Hamas, it does not mean necessarily that you are condemning or denying the Palestinian people's right to resist. But people have to be a little more sophisticated in their understanding of the region, that the U.S. and Israel are not going to just sit there and allow an opposition to grow without at least attempting to infiltrate it, co-opt it, and use it to advance their interests rather than allow this opposition group to oppose their interests. And as I've tried to point out in recent weeks, Hamas's background, it stems from the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood has helped advance U.S. foreign policy objectives in the region for decades. They attempted to overthrow Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's father in the 70s and 80s. They were pivotal in the U.S. engineered Arab Spring from 2011 onward. They helped overthrow the government of Egypt. They laid the foundation for the violence in Syria once again against President Assad now. Hamas itself actually turned on Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, and they actually sent fighters to Syria to fight against the Syrian government, to side with the U.S.-backed militants who were being backed by not just the U.S., but also Israel, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. And so people have to keep all of this in mind. And your opening segment, Alex, and then the points that Carl and Angelo have made, this is very emotional for many people on both sides. And to a certain extent, Israel carries out these atrocities to deliberately provoke people, to deprive them of their ability to reason, to look at something rational, to strategize, and instead provoke a very primitive response, anger, a desire for immediate revenge. And when you are in that mindset, you are incapable of strategizing. And if you want to change the political order in the Middle East or around the globe, you need to be strategic. You need to think both short-term and long-term. You need to think several steps ahead of absolutely everything you do. And not always the best decision is immediate retaliation, immediate revenge. Oftentimes that leads to your undoing. This is an idea that is so well known throughout human history. It was included in The Art of War. This was written 2,500 years ago in China. So just asking people to exercise caution, be more prudent, and be aware of the emotional aspects of this and how it could be an obstacle rather than constructive.
Well, thank you for that insight, Brian. Something that I want to discuss with you, gentlemen. What is it now in North America that is getting people, the average person that would have never talked about this, in a social setting with their friends or their family around the kitchen table at night. What has changed this time from the recent last decade? What has really shifted everyone's eyes? We're seeing protests in major cities across Europe and North America, and really now starting to see a divide. We're seeing outspoken, I'll call them internet influencers, also jump on this as well. Ben Shapiro has been very vocal, and if you read his Twitter feeds, you will see it's probably a 100-1 not in his favor, unfortunately, on what he's talking about. And I find it's rather interesting that if this situation, which it has happened a few years ago in this region, we didn't really talk about it. And what's changing this narrative now, where people are pushing back, saying, wait a minute, I'm going to, take some time. I'm going to look at this. I'm going to see what my government's spending money on. Do you think it was, what we've seen with the amount of money spent in Ukraine over the last few years, that people are just tired of this? Maybe someone can take it. Let me know, gentlemen.
I think there is something to be said about the democratization of media by internet, because if you look at the average viewership of the CNN, the average age of viewership of CNN is 65 and older. And if you look at the breakdown by demographics on who stands with Israel, who supports Palestine, there's a clear generation divide. The younger people, the Zoomers, are definitely more on balance on the side of the Palestinians and Israel, whereas the older folks, who watch CNN regularly, probably they stand with Israel, because the mainstream media are losing their grip on the narrative, because people can go on social media to find out about the world. That has been happening since the Syrian war. That really opened up my eyes, on the hypocrisy of mainstream media. Even though I know they've been lying, but how much they've been lying, I did not know until I look at the on the ground reports. So the younger people are a lot more educated about this issue, rather than simply being on the receiving end of this endless propaganda. I think that has something to do with it.
Thank you for that, Carl. I also think that we are forgetting that the average person really wasn't looking at the financial side of this. And what I mean is the staggering amount of money that these governments have put together. We've seen war after war. Brian, you've had this covered on your channel many times. This proxy war going on in Ukraine, they've dumped so much money in there that we saw an interesting quote by I think it was the president of Belarus said, listen, you can dump all the money that you want in there. The problem is you're out of bodies to fight for you. And when you see that, you really get an understanding on how bad the situation is in the Ukraine. And then you fast forward to say, okay, now we have the conflict in the Middle East here. How far does Israel want to take it? Well, they're testing a lot of governments here. And maybe someone can, divulge and share some information on, who in the Middle East will be the first to step in, because we've only just seen, Lebanon. We've seen a little bit of stuff from Yemen. I mean, who's the one that's going to stand up and say, okay, enough is enough. We're going in. Anyone want to share their thoughts with me on that?
Well, I think everybody is expecting Hezbollah to do something if the Israeli ground invasion really goes underway. I mean, this is why U.S. had parked one of the largest armada right off the coast of Lebanon. I mean, they are. I mean, nobody expect Israel need help to do ethnic cleansing in Gaza, and the fact that the NATO parks this large armada off the coast of Israel and Lebanon. U.S. is clearly sending the signal they expect Hezbollah to do something, and they want to do like so-called show of force to deter that from happening. Of course, that's just going to escalate. There are already crazy U.S. politicians talking about war with Iran, Lindsey Graham, all the usual suspects, and which is crazy because that's just going to blow this up from a regional conflict into a wider World War III. I mean, you know, if you hit U.S. hit Iran, Iran sits right at the you know, mouth of Persian Gulf, Hormuz Strait, and that's the choke point for world's most energy supply. And if that get interrupted, you know, we're going to return back to like the 1970s, kind of the Arab embargo, oil embargo scenario where you're going to feel the economic shock all over the world. I mean, if you think the war in Ukraine is bad on the economy, wait until the Middle East war get touched off. I mean, the people in Washington, they're not thinking through because they're just react by instinct, you know, stand by Israel no matter what. But I bet some people are now panicking about you know, what happened. But it looks like they are not politically, they can't afford not to stand by Israel. But on the other hand, this is a very dangerous path we're going down.
Yeah, if I could expand on that, the whole reason the United States is in the Middle East in the first place, the whole reason they're in Iraq, the whole reason they waged this proxy war on Syria to attempt to remove the government of Syria from 2011 onward is because they are obsessed with provoking a war with Iran and eventually implementing regime change in Iran. This is why they're involved in the Middle East in the first place. So they have Israel there stirring up trouble to deliberately give them a pretext to stay there militarily. And they also have written, signed and dated policy papers where all they talk about is using Israel as a provocateur in the region to stir up trouble, and more specifically, to provoke Iran into a conflict that the U.S. could draw itself into later on once it gets going. And we can see the U.S. preparing the battlefield right now to implement this very policy. As a matter of fact, a lot of these policy papers that the U.S. has, the government has funded in these think tanks over the years, a lot of this has already been implemented. If you read these papers from, say, back in 2009, every single thing they wrote in these papers has since been implemented, or at least they've tried to implement it. So it's very important to understand why the U.S. is in the Middle East. It's not as if, oh, this just happened and we're rushing to Israel's aid. The whole purpose of creating a belligerent proxy like Israel in the region is to constantly stir up trouble and to find opportunities and provocations that will allow the U.S. to exercise military aggression in the region. They've done it repeatedly. They've already carried out attacks against Syria. The U.S. has. Israel has been launching missiles into Syria and southern Lebanon. So there is definitely an idea of possibly expanding this. Carl's talking about how this fleet is parked off the coast of Israel and Lebanon. It could just be to give cover for Israel as they erase Gaza. They'll be cutting it very close logistically and militarily, so maybe it's just for that. But many people fear, and I think these fears are justified, that this is part of a process of escalating toward war with Iran. If you look at the U.S., involved in Ukraine, involved in the Middle East, involved off the coast of China, they're attempting to encircle and contain all of Eurasia. The proxy war in Ukraine is not going very well. The prospect of winning a conflict with China militarily fades day by day. They may think that the Middle East is the one last place where they could slow down, stop, or reverse this pivot away from U.S.-led unipolarism toward multipolarism.
Oh, Brian, you know, we are on a course where I think, you know, the foot is to the floor here on the gasoline, and there's definitely no stopping. I'm going to read you guys an interesting comment that was left on one of the videos here. And it goes the following. You know, I've been hearing about this Palestinian and Israel conflict for close to 50 years. And what I'm noticing is people are actually researching the history on their own today. It used to be that everyone believed whatever the mainstream media said, but those days are gone. Many will research the history of this matter and come to their own conclusions. This is why Israel, for the first time I can remember, is getting a lot of surprising resistance from groups they did not in the past. No one with a functioning mind would ever support the government of Gaza and what they did to Israel citizens, but that's not the reason for genocide. of an entire population. Send in the special forces and take out the bad guys, not children. You have mothers marking their kids' legs and arms so they can know what body parts to claim after the airstrikes from Israel. You know, I was appalled as anyone by what I saw on October 7th, but for God's sakes, this is madness. You cannot convince me that God or anyone would ever think that we'd get to this place. These are comments from just people on videos that, are in news videos. We're seeing very passionate responses, and people, they've had enough. I mean, guys, I'm still trying to understand. This is all over our TV screens. And I'm going to be honest with you. Some of these media outlets are starting to show what's going on in there. I said to my wife a couple of nights ago, this is interesting. I wouldn't have seen this 3 or 4 years ago, or even 2 years ago on the TV screens. Channel 4 would be a channel that I would have never thought showing this type of stuff from the UK. They are in there. To my understanding, they are balanced and very open and very vocal to what's happening in that region. Many other, I don't watch CNN much at all, but some of the interviews that have gone on there lately have raised eyebrows. I think, Carl, you mentioned Wolf Blitzer's interview the other day. I haven't watched Wolf in a decade, maybe 20 years, the last time I watched him, but something's changing here. Anybody can put their hand on it that can want to take over the mic for me.
Well, for one thing, they also realize, to get viewership, any kind of viewership, they actually need to report what's going on. Like you say, why would you watch Wolf Blitzer on CNN when you know he's just a propaganda piece? My guess is they're just trying to stay relevant. And that including showing some of these carnage that's happening right now. And I have to stress that 60% of the population in Gaza are children. When Israel said we're just going there to take out Hamas commanders, and on Wolf Blitzer, CNN, Wolf Blitzer even said this, there's innocent civilians down there. And you just went ahead and to hit them anyway. And the Israeli commander says, "Oh, we have warned them to stay away, to get out, move to South Gaza." And then Wolf Blitzer said, "Well, you bombed anyway." And the Israeli commander, I think he was caught by surprise by this line of questioning, and he said, "Oh, we gave them a chance to move, but this is really about hitting the Hamas commander." And then the Wolf Blitzer says, "Did you get the commander?" And the IDF spokesperson was kind of flustered. He said, we're still waiting for more information. So basically, they killed hundreds of people, many of them children, and in order to supposedly kill a Hamas commander, which they don't even know if they got him or not. But this is shown live all across the world. I think it's increasingly harder to hide what Israeli is committing, which is war crime. And there, some Israeli spokesperson already tried to spin this. Oh, this is equivalent to what allies were doing in strategic bombing of Germany and Japan. But they forget to mention there's something called Geneva Convention to specifically prevent something of the similar nature happening today. Because, yes, there were strategic bombing of cities like Dresden, fire bombing of Tokyo, dropping of nukes on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But that would be war crime today, because after World War II, they specifically had Geneva Convention to avoid deliberately targeting civilians. This is what Israeli response is doing. And I think it goes more than just pure emotional lash out by Israel, because if we look at who is sitting at the head of the government in Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, he has made very clear his aim, and his party is for the greater Israel, to incorporate West Bank and Gaza. And the problem is Israel is set up as a Jewish state. And if you take the greater Israel scenario from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, there are about 6.5 million Israeli Jews, and there's about equal number of Palestinians in this territory. But Israel is not about to give the equal human rights to all the Palestinians living on the territory, because that will essentially wipe out the Jewish character of the Israeli state, or defeating the purpose. So their aim has always been to carry out a second Nakba, which is to expel Palestinians from their land. That's what they're doing in Gaza right now. I mean, they have this pretext of going into evicting Hamas, but the essentially the real results is they're kicking Palestinians out of their homes, which have been claiming on for the last 75 years after their first expulsion from the rest of Palestine. And this is the real reason the world is no longer sitting by and watch it happen, because it's horrific.
Well, Carl, I want to add to that. In fact, the world is sitting on the sidelines and not doing a damn thing about it. That's the problem, I think, that's really irritating a lot of people across the globe here. International Criminal Court, you think the Americans in Israel give a shit? No, they don't. Do you think they care about being hauled in front of the Security Council? No, they don't. They don't give one damn about what's going on there. You know, we have to understand how this media is funded too, and who's the narrative coming from, and how they're setting the narrative in this media. It's very powerful. We damn well know we're not going to get into details on this program about who runs the media and how they run it, but they run it. And we continue to see these images. It's across the screens. Bombardment, kill people, bomb hospitals, bomb parking lots, bomb refugee camps. It can't get any more crazier than what it is. And I am waiting for the shoe to drop. Who is going to take the first step and say, enough is enough. This is bullshit. You're killing people right, left, and center. We see it. You know, yeah, we'll pull our ambassadors out of your country. Yes, we'll cut diplomatic ties with Israel. Okay, we saw Colombia step up. We saw, I think it was Brazil step up. We saw some other Latin American countries step in there. Someone's got to come to these people's rescue here, because we are seeing, truly now seeing modern day genocide right before our eyes. None of this stuff about professors writing papers about regions that they've never visited or anything like that, you know, in Xinjiang or anything like that. We are talking about people that are being brutalized, killed by the second. Every second somebody's being killed in that region. Somebody from the Middle East has got to step up here. Somebody at least. And when you mention the word ceasefire, no ceasefire. We don't want a ceasefire. Seriously? Like, seriously? No ceasefire? Really? I cannot believe these words are coming out of these people's mouths, but they are. The Americans, you know, they stand up there. And even some of the people running for election here, I was quite surprised at a lot of Donald Trump's words, too, in his last statement. But, gentlemen, your thoughts?
I just need 1 second, because I think the lack of international response has to do with the fact that the full-throated support by the West. I mean, Israel has been an outpost of the West in the Middle East since its creation in 1948. And Joe Biden, back in the 80s and 90s, when he was more coherent than he is now, has out in the open and said, if there's not an Israel, then we got to create an Israel to advance our interests in the Middle East. So basically, Israel is a proxy of the United States, a very precious proxy, you know, like, because it's a precious child that can do no wrong. And this is a real reason, Israel is allowed to get away with the crime it's committing. There's actually a tweet from a professor at the Lebanese University in Arabic earlier. He said, "I apologize to my students at the Lebanese University because I was strict in teaching the course on international law, international humanitarian law, and the United Nations. After the Zionist crimes in Gaza, there's no longer a need to teach these courses." And he is absolutely right.
I want to jump in here, Alex. You mentioned why it's a big question. Why the Arab world is not stepping in, especially now you have You have Bolivia that cut ties with Israel. You have Chile. You have Colombia that actually called back their ambassadors. I think maybe why the Zionist state, Israel, is being so brutal, because maybe that's the purpose. You want to elicit a reaction from the Arab world, from the Muslim world, the whole region. And because they know there's Big Brother on their back, and you can actually create a huge chaos. So you've seen 75 years since the creation of Israel, and how many conflicts, and how many times Israel won, and how many times it has divided the Arab world, and it has been a regression economically and politically for the Arab world. So this is a trap again. As much as I personally think this is a speculation, that what Israel did by closing an eye on Hamas activities was a trap, a bait that Hamas took. And because what was the purpose? You see now, after everything that happened, we are in a case where this is the huge opportunity to go towards a greater Israel, to actually do a Nakba 2, to get those 2 million Palestinians to go to the Sinai. That was the opportunity. Who's winning? And what are the chances that these actions by Hamas is going to free Palestinians? We all know it's close to zero. So you see, I think this is a bait. Because I've been asking myself, why would you be so cruel? This is extremely cruel, because you want to elicit a reaction. The problems that those Arab states have right now is their population. Their population are going nuts, and how you are going to contain those populations. And the risk is that you might have regime change because of that, because some of those populations, they cannot accept that. And probably Israeli leaders, they know that.
You know, that's an interesting take, Angelo, but I think there's a game changer, and that game changer started in February 2022 here, where the world pretty much didn't think Putin would go in to protect this region in eastern Ukraine. And he stepped up, and he's holding strong in that region where the rest of the world thought, well, let's pump in $250 billion with NATO. Let's get this guy out of office. We'll regime change in Russia. No problem. Didn't happen. And I think these regions might say, wait a minute, maybe we can take on Big Brother this time, because we're not scared of Big Brother. Big Brother's done nothing in the Ukraine and Russia combat. And I think, Brian, I'm going to ask you to maybe handle this one here. Do you think anybody gives a shit about the United States having a few aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean there off the shores? They might even be sitting ducks sitting there. I understand what you're saying about the false flag and stuff like that, Angelo, but I think, let's see if one goes in and one, goes against, the shelling here against the Palestinians and steps up and says, okay, Israel, we're in, let's on, game on. I think there might be a hell of a lot more support in that region than what there normally was years ago. Brian, maybe you could help us understand this a little bit more.
It's a possibility, but people have asked this in previous episodes of Israeli brutality against Gaza. Why isn't anyone intervening? Why isn't Hezbollah intervening? Why isn't Iran or Iraq or Egypt? Why are they not intervening? The leadership, it's not as if they don't care or they're disinterested or they don't realize that their population wants something to be done, but they have to be realistic. Yes, U.S. power is waning. U.S. power is waning specifically because Russia, China, other nations investing in multipolarism have taken a very measured and patient position on gradually pushing out unipolarism, displacing it with multipolarism. It's not something that can happen overnight. It's not something that you can rush into. It's something that has to take its time. And as it's taking its time, yes, there's going to be provocations like this, and intervening might not necessarily be the best thing in that case. Think about Libya in 2011. It's not as if Russia didn't care about Libya being bombed and wiped out by NATO. They did not have the ability to intervene at that time. If they did intervene at that time, they would have been in a worse position to intervene in Syria, where they actually had the ability to join in and help Syria. So they have to pick their battles very carefully. Russia and China do not have infinite power. Iran most certainly does not have infinite power. They have to pick and choose their actions very carefully, and they have to think several steps ahead into the future. Israel's unhinged. They have a regime in power that does not care about the self-preservation of Israel. They're very similar to Ukraine when we're talking about these unhinged things that Israel does, or the unhinged acts of support that we see in the West for Israel. Just think about how crazy everything was in February 2022 onward in regards to Ukraine. Imagine if the Ukrainian conflict dragged on for 70 years, how insane that support would be, and how delusional and detached from reality the regime in Kiev would be. Look how delusional it is now just after 2 years. So will there be an intervention? If there is an intervention, it'll be via proxies, Hezbollah possibly, but in a very measured way. Same with the forces in Yemen. This is not something that Iran can just automatically jump in and do. There's no mechanism for Iraq, Iran, Egypt to coordinate themselves militarily. Major military campaigns require months, if not years, of preparation. I don't think any of these nations in the region are prepared for a large-scale conflict against Israel, which also would drag in the United States. And the U.S. knows this, which is why they're provoking the region in the first place. They want someone to try to wade in so that they can exercise military power that they have coordinated and prepared for this type of warfare.
Brian,
I agree with Brian's
ahead, Carl.
analysis, because so far the Hezbollah has been quite level-headed in their response to Israel. They are already targeting northern Israel. They're taking out all the surveillance cameras, all the surveillance towers with their rockets attacks. And one thing about Israel's Iron Dome, so it no matter how good an anti-ballistic defense is, it can always be overwhelmed by numbers. And Hamas and Hezbollah has plenty of numbers. And right now, Iran, or the axis of resistance, has already responded by attacking on those isolated U.S. military outposts in Iraq, in Syria. We have already received reports of injury to the U.S. soldiers in Syria and Iraq, and which is also a reminder to people in the United States. Yes, we still have military occupational forces in Syria and Iraq, when years after we have supposedly wrapped up our military intervention in these places. So those areas are for Americans. It serve as sort of also serve as so-called the tripwire, essentially a bait. If they get attacked by Iran, U.S. Pentagon spokesperson and U.S. politician already saying, if the U.S. military force came under attack in Middle East, they will see as even if by Iranian proxies like Shia militias in Syria and Iraq, they will treat it as a direct attack by Iran, and they will respond against Iran. It might be bluffing. They might be bluffing to deter further attack, but you never know. These warmongers in Washington could just be bloodthirsty enough to wage another war. And as just go back to what Brian says about the Ukraine war, a very interesting phenomenon has happened. All these large social media accounts on so-called open source intelligence on Ukraine war that gather a large following during the war are suddenly closing down one by one. And now it's almost like the money has just suddenly evaporated and it's shifted. Now there's going to be new open source intelligence account opened up about Israeli war. This is such an obvious influence up, by some government agency in Washington. So suddenly the money is, nobody cares about Ukraine anymore. Everyone see that Times cover of Zelensky calling him basically unstable and delusional about the prospect of Ukraine winning the war, because he's done. He's a used rag, he's a used condom, and this is that's right. But Brian was right. U.S. have to pivot from war to another war in this endless, to keep going this endless forever war. Maybe they see the prospect of winning Ukraine increasingly diminishing. So why not start another one against Iran that could, keep the military industrial complex going for decades?
But Carl, that's exactly what I'm saying here. Is if the Middle East feel that the Americans are going to go, this is a country that has been irrational for many years, for the last 20 to 30 years here. We can talk about the 2 Iraq wars. We can talk about Afghanistan. We can talk about Libya. We can talk about many places. So does the Middle East countries really think that, the Americans are just going to sit back and kind of twiddle their thumbs here and say, yeah, well, maybe we'll go and maybe we won't. Well, we'll scare them. If they know it's coming, if they feel it's coming, one of them could very well go in. Now, I'm going to say that a lot because, Patrick Lancaster has been on this program. Patrick's talked to Brian and Angelo and many of the people on this program before. You dial this back to 2014, see what was going on there, the treatment of the people in the eastern part of Ukraine. And finally, Russia went in. Surprisingly to a lot of people. Now, maybe there was some intelligence that says that they were going in and building up these forces. But now we see this in the Middle East. We see the Americans there with their destroyers off the shore. They're ramping it up. The media is ramping it up. The neocons are ramping it up. It's not going to take much. It's going to be a firecracker, and it's game on. For us to just assume that the Americans are going to sit back there and not do anything, hell, they've been starting wars there for the last 30 years. What's new? What? They're a little bit worried about Israel? Maybe some of these Middle East countries will say, hey, maybe this is the time. Maybe, just maybe, this is the time to let it rip.
Alex, I need to jump in here. I think there's a topic that people, they should not underestimate. Not only the irrationality of Israel, but also the fact that Israel has the nuclear bomb. This is extremely important. I think if there's a single country in the world that is capable of using the nuclear bomb, is Israel. In the Israeli doctrine, if it becomes existential, they are very clear that they'll be using the nuclear bomb. And this would be the first case after Hiroshima and Nagasaki that use a nuclear bomb. I would imagine that Iran would not go all the way when it comes to Israel because again, that's a deterrent. And I think again, I doubt that the Middle East the Middle East would go to war against Israel because they know this is a trap, and time is on their side. Time is on the side of the global South. Right now, what you have is that you have a U.S. hegemon power that is actually desperate and is slowly collapsing, and they just need to wait. The only problem for the Arab world and the Muslim world in general, Iran is Persian world, is that they might have to sacrifice Palestine. I really believe that they will have to sacrifice Palestine. They are, they are in a big pain, but they have no choice. There's no issue. What is the issue? Can you win against Israel and the US? That would be a suicide. And again, you don't go into a war you cannot win. But again, keep in mind one thing, we don't talk enough about this, is nuclear bomb. And if it becomes existential for Israel, they will use it. I am sure they will use it. Just see how they are behaving against Arab population and how they see them as subhumans. They are very clear about that. They are like, we are going to carpet bomb Gaza. We are going to make it a parking lot. They're very clear intentions.
Please do, Brian. Brian?
Yeah, I want to add on to what Angelo is saying. And I do honestly believe if any country is prone to using its nuclear weapons, it is Israel. And we have to just look at a map and ask ourselves, okay, Israel is doing this to Gaza. What country is in any position to mobilize their military forces and somehow get to Gaza and stop the Israeli military? It is surrounded on two sides by Israeli-held territory. There's Egypt on the border. Okay, Egypt is about the only country that is in some sort of position to do something. And then the Mediterranean Sea is there, and there's, again, a NATO fleet off the coast of Israel and Lebanon. So how can we even imagine that anyone in the region would be able to carry out a feasible, viable military option to stop what Israel is doing in Gaza? I just can't see how it would be possible. Even Hezbollah is an organization. People criticize my criticism of Hamas. I compare and contrast Hamas with Hezbollah. It is a genuine resistance organization. It expelled Israeli occupation from southern Lebanon, and it has prevented Israel from carrying out any incursion into Lebanon ever since then. Their posture, their force is designed for defense. They don't have offensive capabilities. They would not be able to move into Israel. That would be Israel's dream, for them to exit from their element of strength and expose themselves on the offensive. That would be a dream come true for Israel. So this is why, as much as we see this injustice and want it to stop, it just isn't realistic. It's, we're used to seeing the U.S. fail so badly in Ukraine. We want to see it fail everywhere else, but they are going to get some lucky shots in, just as Angelo said, unfortunately, for Palestine. And I would say it also partly due because of Hamas and its history, its recent history, its origins. It has been unable to attract wider support from the region because of what it did in regards to Syria during the U.S. proxy war there, and for many, many other reasons. So I want to see it stop, but it just isn't realistic, unfortunately.
But I think Hezbollah may not necessarily launch a ground invasion of Israel in force, but they could possibly do more if Israel really gets this ground operation in Gaza underway. Because and the difference between Hamas and Hezbollah is Hezbollah is a lot more principled. Even though they fought on the opposite side of Hamas during the Syrian war, they are still voicing their full support for the Palestinian cause. And if the war escalates and if the full ground invasion of Gaza does start, I do believe Hezbollah would step in with more attacks against northern Israel, and in that case, Hezbollah will gather the support of the entire Arab world, just like back in the days in the days of Lebanon civil war, when they were the heroes in much of the Muslim world, not just the Arab world, but the wider Muslim world. And some people forget that the Muslim world exists much bigger outside the Arab world. There's more than 1 billion Muslims worldwide. Indonesia is actually the world's largest Muslim majority country, and you already have people in as far field as Malaysia, this like very pliable kind of the Western friendly, Southeast Asian Muslim country is now stepping up and saying, look, what Israel is doing is unacceptable. So I don't expect like a full-blown Middle East war, but we could see something like 1970s, like the Arab embargo, the oil embargo. If they do that, the economy is going to get wrecked. I mean, goodbye to any re-election chance of Biden, if he has any. I mean, at this point, I think Biden could lose. I mean, Trump could win. Biden is already losing all the Muslim votes in Michigan. I mean, they're not going to act as their swing votes voter base for Democrats anymore. And we are. So we're looking at multiple things going on. There's U.S. domestic politics. There's Israeli domestic politics, because Bibi was Netanyahu before. He was fighting a very divided Israeli public. He wants to be the war president to rally the nation, so to speak. And you have Biden trying to win the re-election. So this conflict can go like 100 different directions. And I do believe that Hezbollah do have capability to step up their attack on Israel, because unlike IDF, we have seen how they just basically either it's a false flag attack, or it's a setup, or IDF really got caught with their pants down, which is a real possibility, because what has the IDF been doing for the last decades after their withdrawal from Lebanon? They've been doing police action, counterinsurgencies, which is really bad for the morale of a army. When you're doing police action, you actually lose your capability to fight a regular war. Whereas the Hezbollah are war hardened. They have real combat experience for fighting in the Syrian war. So I think kind of the qualitative difference, at least in terms of morale and discipline, I think Hezbollah might actually have an edge over Israel.
Gentlemen, I want to step into this conversation here and add something that maybe you guys probably wouldn't expect from me to say this. Now, I'm looking at this panel like all four of us are sitting around a table having a couple of beers, chatting about this late into the night and being open with each other. I cannot fathom or even get in my head why Israel would shoot off nuclear warheads to where? And I'll let you guys answer this in a moment, because so Israel would send a nuke. Where would they send it? Iran? Definitely not to Palestine, because they would nuke themselves. So where would they do it? Why would they do it? I mean, if it's in their own backyard, they're done. In fact, they're almost restricted. It's like saying, America would shoot a missile into Canada. Unheard of. Never would happen. Now, across, thousands of miles, maybe. We saw it happen from aircraft or from bombers in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Yes, I get it. I understand that. But, I mean, this is the Middle East. To send one of those off in your own backyard, I mean, I can't see them do that. And if they do, I mean, they're done anyway. So I really don't think that they're going to use a nuclear. No one would take them serious. Now, yes, of course you would think, because, they're not thinking logically. I get that. Like, hey, somebody's going to pull the trigger and light it up. I understand that point, but it doesn't make any sense to me why they would even go nuclear. My issue is I think what's more worrying is not Israel, it's those aircraft carriers. And Brian, you can add in on this as well. And I respect everything that you say. You've been right almost 100% of the time here. So why would Israel even possibly even think about using a nuclear weapon? Where? How? To who? And what for? I mean, they'd have the wrath of them with the Russians all over them in an instant. So I think a weapon like that is a non-starter. I think Israeli became very complacent. They thought that they had great technology, great security technology, that to prevent something like this, as Carl said, they got caught with their pants down. They look like fools, and they got damage control politically on their own soil. So what happens? They go in, they carpet bomb. I mean, you can't level Palestine more than you're leveling it now. Forget the goddamn ground invasion. They bombed the damn place anyway. I don't even know if you could get tanks to run in the streets there. I mean, it's everything I see on the news is just concrete buildings flattened out. So educate me, boys. Somebody help me out here. Educate me. Take the mic.
Well, Israel would use nuclear weapons if it was a large-scale regional conflict, and it appeared that they were doing it in terms of self-preservation. I don't think they have these enormous nuclear weapons that the U.S. and Russia have. I think they're tactical nuclear weapons, so they'd be much more limited in terms of the radius and fallout. I mean, of course, they wouldn't want to do it to Gaza or the West Bank, but someplace in Lebanon or definitely somewhere in Iran, I think would be actually feasible. But beyond that, the U.S. and Israel dragging Iran or Syria or Lebanon into a large-scale regional conflict, none of these countries are eager to do that. Syria is still just hanging on. They haven't even begun full-scale reconstruction. They don't even have all of their territory back. Lebanon is constantly at the edge of socioeconomic chaos. All the countries in the region have been treading a very fine line. They from the Arab Spring, the disruption that it caused, that endures to this day. They're really not eager for a conflict at all. Now, in terms of the aircraft carriers off the shore, it's possible that Iranian or Hezbollah weapons could somehow hit them, but I really don't think that is feasible. I don't think these aircraft carriers would be hit and sunk unless Russia was somehow involved, and I don't think that Russia wants to get involved in that way. I want to remind people that the virtue of patience in a conflict, it is counterintuitive. People don't want to hear it. They will always push back against it. But just think about Russia in Ukraine, or even before that in Syria, the humiliation, the setbacks that they faced, engineered and crafted by the U.S. as a provocation, the way they ignored it and continued pushing on. When Turkey shot down a Russian warplane, everyone was screaming, Russia needs to carpet bomb Ankara or something like that, and they didn't. A Russian ambassador was gunned down, murdered in Turkey. And Russia, they will asymmetrically respond, but it will not be the type of revenge that the public thirsts for. And they will be patient, and because they know in the future, eventually they can win over Turkey. And people may not believe this, but that is the same mentality both Russia and China have in terms of Israel. They know the source of the problem is not in Israel, it is in the United States. And when they can reshape the region and displace the corrosive U.S. influence over the region, they will be able to turn even Israel. But they cannot do that if they wage a region-wide war, if they jump the gun and they allow themselves to be provoked. That is just not possible. And conversely, the U.S. knows this transformation of the region can be slowed down, stopped, or even reversed by triggering a massive region-wide conflict, which is exactly what it seems they're trying to provoke right now.
Brian, well said. I'm going to go to Carl and Angelo, and I'm going to pose a question to you guys here. Brian, thank you very much for that thorough answer. I appreciate that, and it allows me to understand a little bit more on what's going on in that region. We've seen Russia come under sanctions. We've seen major companies leave that country. Fortune 500 companies have left. Banking, they've been ripped off the SWIFT. They can't allow to trade through the SWIFT banking system. We've seen Visa, MasterCard, American Express leave it. We've seen major automobiles stop being imported. Even Apple doesn't import their products into the country anymore. We've seen the sanction ladder go on up in, I think, to the 12th or 13th sanction. The U.S. pretty much has sanctions on over 1/3 of the world right now as we speak. The European Union has pretty much blocked Russians from actually coming to the country. You can get a visa if you're lucky. But I've spoken to individuals that have went back to Russia since the last 6 months. And maybe, Carl, you can help out. The doom and gloom that is painted on the media, this is an economy that has survived it, got through it, got through economic warfare on their own economy. As much damage as you could do to an economy, it should have happened, but it didn't. It backfired. We've seen Russia, go above Germany in economies here now. I mean, the real loser on this one hasn't been Russia when it comes to the economy. Sure, there are sectors, there are companies that had to leave, but maybe we are seeing a change here for the first time in, especially my generation, where it used to be the game book, America, go in, regime change, bring democracy, put in the puppet that they want in their business as usual. NATO's first invasion into Yugoslavia broke that up for history to now see with all the new countries that were formed from it. But now there's a new game in town, and that is Vladimir Putin. He stood up. He could have been smoked. His economy could have been completely smoked. Now, what I'm hearing from the people that have been there, and maybe, Carl, you can vouch for me or disagree or agree, American cars are not really going on the streets. It's Chinese cars that are now going on the streets. It's not banks from the United States like Citibank opening up there. Bank of China is opening up there and opening new accounts. No longer did it feel safe to change the ruble to the US dollars. It's now the RMB now. So we have seen an entire country of 120 or 30 or 40 million people in the matter of a year and a half completely flip their economy over and go right back in the other way to pretty much be self-contained. Not much can be said for the rest of Europe right now. Gentlemen.
Well, first of all, Alex, I need to correct you because
Please.
Even before the American sanction, there's not that many American cars in Russia. It's either Japanese or German. But now, yes, you're right. They're being replaced by Chinese cars. And what the Western sanction has done essentially is all these Western companies are ceding their market share in Russia to Chinese and Russian brands. And I was in Russia in June, just in time for the Prigozhin's little coup. And what I've observed on the ground is that people are leading normal lives. Like a lot of people who saw footages I posted of me walking around in Moscow commented, "Oh, this doesn't look like a country that's in the midst of war." No, that you definitely don't feel that in Moscow. Maybe except a couple military posters, but people are not only leading productive lives, but they seem quite content. This one thing that really surprised me, even though I know kind of the slant of the Western media agenda, is actually to see all the colors in Moscow. That's when I realized a lot of the images that we get filtered through Western media, they get put through like the BBC filter lens or something. The image you get in the West is always Russia as this like gray, kind of unhappy, gloomy country. But when I was in the summer in Moscow, it's beautiful. It's the flowers are blooming. All the buildings are in multicolor. It's great. It's a beautiful country. I would love to, Moscow, I would say, was one of the most beautiful city that I ever visited, and I've been to a lot of places. And the shops, the coffee shops, the side street cafes, they're full. They're full, and and Russia in 2022, they actually managed to sell more goods and services than the previous year, because Russia have real commodities that people need, like oil and gas and different minerals. And if the West don't want them, they can sell to China, India, other global South countries. And the Europe are still getting gas from Russia. Maybe not directly, but they're getting it via India, but at a premium price. This is through the stupid policy of the European leaders. And if you fly on Chinese airlines or any other airlines, you can still fly through the Russian airspace. Like I flew Cathay Pacific to Beijing, so I actually flew over North Pole through the Russian airspace. American airlines and European airlines can't do that right now. So yeah, like the Russia doesn't need the so-called international community that consists of United States and its vassal states in Europe and Japan and South Korea. Right now, the aggregate economy of BRICS is larger than the G7 countries combined. So right now, the West, the so-called Western Alliance, so-called collective West, is becoming increasingly irrelevant, and this is why they're fighting tooth and nail to preserve their faltering hegemony, first in Ukraine and now possibly in the Middle East as well. But we are seeing really kind of like the credibility of U.S. falling by the wayside. I mean, like the reason a lot of the political elite in U.S. hate Trump is because he kind of ripped away the facade and show the emperor has no clothes, and they walk on Biden because he's all about multilateralism, building alliance. But this Palestinian conflict really shows how brutal U.S. policy really is. How corrupt this oligarchic system really is. And but I think I'm also on the same wavelength as Brian. I believe Russia, China, and as well as countries in the Middle East, Iran and other Arab countries will play this more rationally than say Israel or even United States. And because they're not, other than Israel and United States, most countries in the region, they're not interested in wars. They are more interested in development. That's why they're signing up for the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to get some Chinese investment to actually bring real infrastructure into the region. But whereas Israel and U.S. are specializing in destruction, because that's what their economy is based on right now. Like Mitch McConnell, when he gave an interview, he said, Ukraine war is great. We're rebuilding our industry. You know, like the Ukrainians are getting killed for sure, but we are rebuilding our economy, because this is what U.S. is about now: military Keynesianism. It's you know, we build nothing but weapons. So, but I don't think this is sustainable in the long term. You know, the sanction on Russia already really accelerated the trend of de-dollarization. You know, that moves Russia out. They already announced the bilateral trade between Russia and China is now 95% concluded in either yuan or Russian rubles. And other countries are following suit. You know, Brazil, South Africa, everyone is saying, like, why do we need US dollar anymore? And it's a real legitimate question. And when the dollar hegemony goes, so goes the US empire, because the financial, the U.S. dominance in finance is one of the last leg of the U.S. empire. You have, you know, there's three legs of U.S. empire: the military, finance, and tech. And the tech and military are, you know, they're kind of wobbly right now. And the finance is the last leg standing. And now it looks like it might not last long.
You know, Carl, you make that comment that, you know, the United States, the military-industrial complex, wants to continue, you know, as you're quoting Mitch McConnell. I mean, once again, I go back to the Middle East here. If that's America's intention, I mean, you know, having, you know, Israel blow up Palestine is not enough for that big mouth to feed. So someone's got to be next here. And that's why I'm saying is everyone's thinking, well, okay, are the Palestinians are going to be absolutely wiped out because what, Israel is on a mission and this is their goal? I think the goal is bigger than this. And I think that no matter how much restraint the Middle East countries do or sit on the sidelines here, America is saying, we're okay. Yeah, we're fine to go to war. Let's go. We're ready. We have the aircraft carriers. We got the military industrial complex. We're going to borrow, I think it was the last quarter here in the next 90 days, I saw it from the Treasury. They're borrowing about $877 billion. That's with a B here in the next 90 days. Okay. For the U.S. economy. That's huge. And some of these Middle Eastern countries are going to pretty much be quite happy with the price of oil through all of this. And, you know, I went back to natural gas here. My prediction that natural gas would hit $3.50 a handle, bang, happened last night. Celebration time. So there's a lot at play here. Economies are at play here. I don't think anyone's scared of NATO anymore or anyone's scared of America. But is it America that's going to take that step and say, okay, well, we have to escalate this. So who's it going to be? I don't think it's kind of like, will Russia get in there or will this other nation get in there? I mean, we've seen enough bloodshed that many countries should stand in defense for these helpless people in that region. So if it's not these regions getting involved, then my prediction is America is going to be involved in some way if we are all saying that the military-industrial complex is a big mouth to be fed.
Anyway. But Alex, you know, U.S. want to be involved all across the globe in every conflict. But you know, right now it's the mind, the will is strong, but the flesh is weak. You know, the U.S. military machine has already been stretched to its max during the Ukraine war. They couldn't even provide enough artillery shells for the Ukraine military forces. I
agree with you. I agree with you. Totally agree with this entire panel. I've agreed with all you guys. And what I'm trying to say is the neocons in the United States, the Treasury, Janet Yellen, we can afford it. These are people that are writing the checks for it. They don't give a damn about how many people are going to die, how much equipment needs to be replaced. They're just looking at their balance sheet and saying, wait a minute, we'll borrow $877 billion over the next 90 days. No problem. Done. Let's see, we're going to earmark $65 billion for Ukraine. Don't worry, Alinsky, you'll get your cash. Sit back, wait. Check's coming. You'll get your FedEx package soon. Okay, now we're on to Israel. Okay, and while we're at it, let's throw another $15 billion in the tank for Taiwan. My understanding is Ukraine, Middle East, China. Anyone think different?
Well, I would just add that Iran probably knows that it is the target. I think it's very clear that Iran is the target. The U.S. is doing this military buildup. They're openly saying this is aimed at specifically Iran. They have written policy papers for years and years, planning for war with Iran, attempting to provoke Iran into war, covertly overthrowing the government, funding opposition groups inside Iran, terrorist organizations inside Iran. Iran has been weathering all of this. And even though they may think it's inevitable that the U.S. is going to try to provoke a war one last time with Iran before it is irreversibly pushed out of the region, for Iran, from their point of view, it's better to make the U.S. and Israel come to them. If they want a war, they have to cross that distance, leverage their air forces, put their air forces in danger. Iran has modern air defense systems, and they've also hardened many of their military sites. Their vital infrastructure is hardened in anticipation of an air campaign. And people have to remember that no matter how intense an air campaign is, it is never enough to overthrow a government. They need troops on the ground, either proxies or they need to invade directly. And part of the attack, the initial attack on Iran, may be to provoke a reaction they can then use to march. Imagine if Iran sank an aircraft carrier, the way they would probably be able to mobilize the American people who at this point really aren't interested in a war in the Middle East. But imagine how they could probably mobilize part of the population and start building up for some sort of ground operation. I'm just putting that out there. Do they have the ability to do this? Look at how the conflict in Ukraine is going. I would say no, but they have consistently made irrational decisions. They just fail forward into additional wars, which is scary. But Iran understands this, and they are going to make the U.S. put in all of the energy to make this happen, rather than go to them on America's terms. That's how I see it. I don't know if that answers your
you've
question.
been quiet, Angelo.
Yeah, well, lots of very interesting input. There's one point which is about the rationality of the whole region. I think every single step when it comes to very important decisions, I think most of the countries in the region are consulting with Russia and China, and this makes a huge difference because they are, I think, they are much more rational. If you look at previous government in the region, we had leaders that were a bit emotional, rational. I'm thinking about Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi. Now I think it's there's more maturity, and they are playing together. One single example is just the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and who was in the middle was China. So I'm expecting really rational moves. My only fear is that if we have a false flag operation, so some type of Pearl Harbor or the Gulf of Tonkin, that's the biggest fear, and that would lead to escalation. Again, we see the U.S. being overstretched. They cannot, lead 3 wars at the same time. It's impossible. They don't have the capacity. But again, it's not necessarily about winning. I think it's like how do they say? They say if you cannot win, you just turn the whole region into rubble. And we've seen it many times. It's not about winning. If you create chaos, what did they do with Libya? Ultimately, you just create chaos, and that's that's how they see it. It's extremely evil. It's not about you just controlling. If you cannot have a puppet, well, just destroy the whole thing. And you set Libya to 20 years ago. It's setback of 20 years, and that's how they see it. It's about containing, because they see that indirectly, it's not containment of Russia and China. It's containment of the whole global South. So if you destroy, if you divide, it's not necessarily about conquer. It's divide and destroy sometimes, and that's what they want to do with the Middle East. And this single project of Israel, keep in mind that this was even before the creation of Israel. The British Empire had the objective to create what they called a foreign entity that would be just right there in the middle. And the purpose of that entity was to divide the whole Arab world, because they knew that the Arab world was extremely dangerous because they had natural resources, they had a common language, and they had a common religion. And it was extremely dangerous. Just think about, just for 1 second, how the whole Arab world, if it was united as a single nation, because they could have done it if they didn't have done the usual divide and conquer. Because even now, the conflict you have in the Arab world, in the whole Middle East, are related to the borders that were designed by the British Empire mostly. Why do you have anomalies in the Middle East? You have artificial countries like let's say Kuwait. Kuwait denies the access to the sea to Iraq. Then you have Kurdistan, which is divided in 4 countries, split in 4 countries. So you create this divide on purpose because, so they planned this a long time ago by designing the borders. And in Israel, that single function was to divide. You see, what people forget is that Zionist movement was an anti-Semite project on the first place. Who were the first Zionists? Hitler was a Zionist. Henry Ford, he was a Zionist because they wanted to deport Jews, and then they had to find a reason. But ultimately, just think for a second. If you were a Jew, you're living in Europe, why would you want to go to Israel? You live in Europe. You're going to a foreign land that you don't know. You don't have any connection to this land. They were deported. It was against their will. And then you create a narrative and you brainwash them into this. Oh, we have a mission and we need to go back to the promised land. But in reality, even if you look at the scriptures, it goes against the scriptures, because in the scriptures, in the Torah, it says that the Jewish nation, we can go back to the land of Israel only when the Messiah is back. So this is why you have a big fringe of the Jewish population, we call them the Magna Carta, that are against the Zionist project, because in the scriptures, it says clearly that you should go back to the land of Israel only when the Messiah is back. Unless Benjamin Netanyahu is the Messiah, they're not supposed to be there. Sorry about, the little,
No, I think, Angelo, everyone's making great points here. And that's what this program is about, to talk about, to try to understand how these regions work, to question all of us, to, like I said, 4 guys around sitting, having beers, chatting about this, getting into a heavy discussion. You mentioned, America, can they do 2 wars or 3 wars at the same time? I don't think they give a damn. In fact, they keep saying, well, it's not our guys that are fighting. So it's really down to the Treasury. America, maybe they can't win it, but America can definitely write checks for it. They know how to write checks on the U.S. taxpayers' dollars, of course. So what is this, 25 to 35 billion, which is 10 years of what Israel would have got? They get it right away here very soon. Where's that cash going? That cash has got to be used for something. So once again, we see maybe part 2 to the U.S. expansion of the military-industrial complex to the Middle East here, where they say, okay, great, we got 25 billion. We don't have to put any of our boys on the ground there. Let's just sit back and see what kind of chaos that we can do, because, we make a killing off of killing. And a lot of these American companies do that. Raytheon, this is their business plan. Like hell they want peace in the Middle East. No way, not even close. 25 million? Minor. Just getting started, just heating it up. Let it rip, boys. And that's their attitude. And that's been their attitude for the last year and a half. They really, really thought, oh, let's go in and let's get that pipeline. If we can't have that pipeline, let's bomb it. Okay. If we can't have that regime change, let's spend $250 billion to see if we can actually, get Putin out of power. Didn't happen. And that's why I'm saying the Middle East, some country might say, okay, we're going to call the bluff here. This is for all the marbles this time. Let's go. Because Russia called the bluff. I would have never thought that they would have gone in the way they went in and stayed in the way they stayed in, with all the marbles on the line. Everything in that entire country that could have happened to them in the last 19 months did happen to them. And they proved to the rest of the world, if you're big, small, medium, or whatever, you can stand up to the military-industrial complex, and you can stand up to NATO. And someone in the Middle East might be just tired of this bullshit and say, you know what, America, you can write checks, but we can fight. And that's maybe, I understand, Angelo, your point about the false flag. Brian, I understand your point talking about the strategy of the Americans in the Middle East and how they want to go through it. And Carl, I also get your point. But I seriously think that we are in a much different world than what we were, 3 or 4 years ago. And we've seen a country that I think most of the West thought was a laughingstock. If you watched the mainstream media over the last year, Russians are fighting with shovels, or Russia is out of artillery. Okay. I mean, Russia's a country that could pretty much say, just like China, and this is where, Carl, I want your insight on this. If America even thought of coming to the shores here and doing something in Taiwan, I can tell you that pretty much every factory outside of this door here, even in Southwest China, could be pumping out military artillery within days, and 1.5 billion people would get behind it. So that's why I'm really trying to get my head around this, guys, by saying, are we really thinking that the world's going to sit by and see, and we're seeing it, it's on our screens, we're really going to see the Palestinians completely wiped out and no one's going to do anything about it? I think we really underestimate, humanity here. And I think we have to give some of these countries in the Middle East a little bit of credit when it comes to fighting back, because they have tried to fight back against the Americans before. Of course, Iraq, Saddam lost and was eventually killed in court after his trial. But I think somebody has the cojones to say, you know what, America, you have done nothing in the Ukraine. You've spent $250 billion. You're weak. Bring it on. That's my 2 cents, guys. I don't know. Somebody, please help me.
In a way, and I think Carl kind of touched on this, the Middle East is doing something. They're reshaping the region, and they're working to displace the U.S. presence, its control over the region, its military bases. They are building up their military capabilities, both as a deterrent, but also to attack U.S. military bases, illegally occupying countries in the region. Iran supplies weapons and other resources to Hezbollah to maintain a credible deterrent in southern Lebanon to prevent Israel from entering into Lebanon again. And the whole point is to incrementally pivot the region away from this unipolar order the U.S. has imposed on the region and move it towards multipolarism. The idea of a country right now in the region as it is right now, say like in the next month or 3 months, militarily intervening in the Israeli operation in Gaza, it's just, it cannot happen. It's just, there's no country in the region that has the resources, the logistics, the ability to do that in a credible way. I mean, there are maybe asymmetrical things they could do, but that may just compound it. When we talk about Russia, they prepared for over 10 years for the special military operation, probably longer. They probably have been preparing since at least 2008, when Georgian forces attacked Russian forces and triggered that short war. Russia looked at what was going on. They understood that NATO was encircling and encroaching on them, and that Ukraine would be next. And they prepared ever since. They were building up their military industrial capacity. They were developing the weapons that they would need. And the special military operation is being fought right on their border. They just crossed the border into Ukraine, a country that had been a part of Russia in the past, a country that speaks the same language, a country whose infrastructure the Soviet Union had built. So that I don't think could be compared to the situation in the Middle East. Again, the best country in a position to do anything would be Egypt. But I just don't think that they're in any position militarily to do that. I think if they got involved, it would make things more complicated for them. But what they could do, what Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, what they can all do is continue working to isolate the U.S. and Israel in the region and continue pivoting things toward multipolarism. I know that's not the answer people want to hear, but that's how reality works. There are physical, real limitations on what nations can do in a time of war, and the countries in the region understand that, and they're doing what they actually can do, what is actually practical to do, which will take time. It is going to be a long process, and we're going to have to suffer through injustice as it unfolds. So people have to think, if say Russia jumped the gun and sent their forces to Libya and then Syria, and then they reacted to Turkey and they got involved in a big war with Turkey, and then they carried out the special military operation in Ukraine, and every time Ukraine did something, or the UK sent whatever missiles they were sending, and the US sent ATACMS, Russia attacked the UK and the US, they would have lost. They would have lost a long time ago. This patient, strategic process of understanding the situation and incrementally advancing it in your favor. This is what is going to happen in the Middle East.
Gentlemen, I had a question up there. Did you guys see it before?
I missed it. I was ranting and raving, and I didn't read it.
No, your rant was great, Brian. Don't stop.
I love it. Guys, I just want to tell you guys that when we sit down and we have these conversations, I want the audience to understand that these are four guys that have either met each other or friends of each other or known each other for years. This is how we learn and understand, by talking with each other. We're from different cultures, from different countries, from different nations, and all different walks of life, even people outside of this program. Channels like the Duran, channels like Cyrus Jansen, channels like Alexander Makuris, Alex Christoforou, some other notable names, Danny Haipong, Ben Norton, all these people that run these channels. I think Richard was it Metcalf? Is that correct? Medhurst. Sorry. Richard Medhurst. Also George Galloway's program. I mean, this is amazing. Scott Ritter has also helped out on various shows. So I want people to understand that it's not our idea to come on this program and agree with each other, to say, how I agree with him and I agree with him. Sure, there's a lot of things that we agree with on geopolitics, but it's good that sometimes we challenge each other or try to get that understanding for when we're posed for that question, whether it's over a dinner with the family or friends. I can at least tell you, my wife always says to me, Alex, you never look at getting into a geopolitical conversation, but for some reason, when you sit at a table, when there's 10 or 15 people, somebody comes up to you and starts talking about geopolitics within about 5 minutes. And then she says, well, it's good because you're taken care of for the evening and I can go enjoy myself with the girlfriend. So that's what she says. But the question that was put up on the screen here was about explaining the difference, or they wanted someone to explain about Zionists. Did you see that, Angelo, that question that was on here?
No, I was actually absorbed with the answer of Brian. I was listening, with attention. So, but I saw something passing. I think it was it like the super chat? Was it the super chat?
No. I'll give you the floor here. I'm going to go back and look into this, and then I'll bring it up on the screen. So go ahead.
I just want to jump in for a second and to piggyback what Angelo said earlier and what Brian said earlier. So so Angelo said that maybe the whole U.S. goal is to wreck the rest of the world. To a certain extent, that is true because that helps to funnel all the investment back into United States. U.S. appear to this island of stability in an increasingly destabilized world. That's why people continue to buy U.S. treasuries and so on and so forth. But somebody is paying a price for that, and in large part, it's a U.S. partners or really vassal states in Europe that's bearing the price. We saw what happened after Libya got destabilized. Europe got hit with a wave of refugees. U.S. sit across the Atlantic. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect United States. But Europe, again, is bearing the burden of the Ukraine war, of the sanction on Russia. They're cut off on the cheap Russian gas supply. And if the Middle East is further destabilized, guess what? Europe is at the doorstep. Europe is going to be asked to bear the burden of the consequences of U.S. actions. I mean, it might be fine for the political elite in U.S., but this is going to put the further strain on the transatlantic relationship. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, the European leaders are a bunch of cooks, but I don't know how long the European people can suffer these basically mouthpieces for Washington, dominating their airwave. Who knows what von der Leyen even do? Like this is and Joseph Borrell. This is a bunch of jokers, and this is gonna further strain the U.S. imperial system, which in large part needs the support of these overseas bases, of the basing rights, of the support of its so-called partners in Europe. And what Brian says about like basically the countries being trying to play rational in Middle East, it makes a lot of sense, because like Lavrov says, Russia and China are truly sovereign countries. They could stand up and say no to United States. But the U.S., even though U.S. is a declining empire, as we have discussed many times over, it still has a lot of power, especially firepower, to the places, especially in the Middle East. There's not many countries of the same weight class as the United States. And so they're going to try to play it safe. They're going to try to play it rational. They're trying to plan it out for the long term. Nobody is going to rush in to touch off a bigger regional war, because that's not what they want. This is what U.S. and Israel want. Sun Tzu said in the Arts of War, you don't want to fight your enemy at their chosen ground. You choose your own battlefield and lure them into it. I mean, actually, just this morning, I think Israel just announced they acknowledged they just walked into an ambush in Gaza, and the public acknowledged 9 soldiers got killed. They're probably just lowballing the number. The number could be a lot higher, but it also kind of shows the IDF. They are not kind of what the media propaganda has been telling us is this unstoppable war machine. The idea of capability have in fact been degraded by its role in the past decade of serving as a police force on the helpless Palestinian civilians. They actually may not be up to the task to fight a brutal urban warfare, which require to drop bombs on densely packed urban spaces full of women and children is one thing. It's another thing to actually go inside the rubbles and try to root out, like, say, Hamas militants from their tunnels, because if anything, the air campaign it actually helps the urban guerrillas, because you're creating this urban hellscape where it kind of negates the Israeli superiority in the air power, and when you send your grunts in, you're going to expect a lot more casualties. And so we're going to have to see how this plays out. But what other Arab countries and people in the region can do is to push for the ceasefire, just as Russia and China has tabled in United Nations, because that is a proper channel that's the most reasonable approach, to call for the ceasefire, immediate ceasefire that will put a stop to the suffering of the Palestinian civilians, and to put forth a political solution. And in fact, this principle stance is making the U.S. position and Israeli position increasingly untenable in the eyes of the world public right now.
But Carl, the eyes of the world have sat back here. Many countries have asked for a ceasefire here over the last week here. Gentlemen, there's a question on the board here. If nobody wants to answer it, or if somebody wants to answer it, please do. If not, we can move on to another question.
Zionism is about Jewish supremacy. Being a Jew is a religion. So it's two entirely different things. Judaism is a religion. Zionism is political. And I would compare Zionism with certain political ideology very popular in Western Ukraine these days. And I'd also compare it with the supremacist ideology that the U.S. encourages the Western-leaning population of, say, Taiwan or Hong Kong. This idea that they're better than everyone else, and they should be the ones running everything, and they should have the land, and these inferior people should either be subordinated to them or just purged entirely. And it's the same ideology the British Empire would impose on regions that it was trying to divide and conquer. And that's exactly, just like Angelo was saying, this was all about divide and conquer. So many people obsessively, myopically focus on just Israel and Palestine, and they have a blind spot. They don't see that the US is doing this absolutely everywhere else as well. And the ideology that the US is implanting in all of these other different areas is just as toxic and deadly, destructive, and divisive as Zionism is. And people should not conflate Zionism with Judaism. There are people in Israel who are appalled with what they were born there. They didn't choose to be born there. They're appalled with what their government and military are doing. And when we just lump everyone into the same group, what are those people going to do? They want to fight for our cause, but you're targeting all Jews. They're going to have to, just for self-preservation, they're going to have to rally around this horrible government that they otherwise oppose. So we have to be careful about that. We have to be careful about lumping people together. And that's a good question, because it allows us to distinguish the difference between Judaism and this political ideology of Zionism.
And
I'd like to add that actually the first victims of Zionists are Jews themselves. Just think about for a second, for centuries, Jews and Arabs were living in peace. When you had these new Zionist movements that came from outside. Keep in mind that you don't need to be Jew to be Zionist. You have many, actually, the most radical Zionists are actually evangelical zealots that you have in the West, especially in the US. So you see the first victims are actually the Jews. It's very counterintuitive. And I think I have even my own theories that I think that the core idea of Zionists is extremely anti-Semite, And actually, the term itself, Semite, actually Arabs are Semites. All Arabs are Semites, but not necessarily all Jews are Semites. This is a huge subject, but because 70% of Jews are Ashkenazi, and Ashkenazi are actually Europeans that were, ethnically Europeans that were converted in Jews. So they are not even Semites. So the whole term's even anti-Semite. It doesn't make any sense, because Arabs are Semite, Jews not necessarily are Semite.
Carl, before I let you come into the conversation, I just wanted to remind Brian, I have a question for you. If you can answer before the end of the show, then I'll pass the mic over to Carl for a minute here. Do you think that if the ground offensive starts, gets into high gear and Israel brings a lot of troops into that region, do you think that is what Hamas and Hezbollah want, is to bring all those soldiers, as Carl was saying, that, this is pretty rough territory to be fighting in, and you get all those soldiers in that one spot, in that one real, we'll call it open prison, and they're sitting ducks, are they not?
Well, in previous operations, Israel would attempt to storm the Strip. In 2008, 2009, Operation Cast Lead, they attempted to isolate just northern Gaza. They actually did an incursion deep into Gaza City, and it was going so well that they said, why don't we just finish off Hamas? We're facing no resistance. It was a surprise operation. It took Hamas off guard. But As the operation continued, it was a 3-week in total operation. They started to suffer casualties, and they realized that this would be a very heavy price. If they want to finish this to its conclusion, it'll be a very heavy price. What they're doing now, we've already seen, we're at week 4. So it's already longer than Operation Cast Lead in 2008, 2009. And what they're doing is they're encircling northern Gaza. They're encircling Gaza City. They have cut it off from the rest of the Gaza Strip. And they have 2 choices. They can just storm the city, or they could just wait. And if they just wait and they attempt to cut off and starve out and strangle the people left in northern Gaza, in Gaza City, then they can hold off their all-out assault on these urban environments and when they feel that Hamas is sufficiently depleted. Another thing that they're doing, and when people say they're carpet bombing Gaza, this is not an exaggeration. You go to the Financial Times, they have satellite images of what they're doing. They're bombing entire blocks completely flat, and they're pushing the rubble out, and it's basically turning it into a parking lot. Just, you always hear these people say, turn Gaza into a parking lot, and then when Israel's bombing hospitals to do that, they're like, no, Israel would never do that. But that is actually what they're doing, and they clear out these huge areas that Israeli troops can operate out in the open, where they have the advantage. So yes, when you're bombing the inner parts of this urban built up area, you create a labyrinth that benefits the defender. But right now, along the outskirts, they're just flattening everything, and they're denying Hamas any sort of potential firing position. But at the same time, they're wiping out the civilian population. So it's very similar to how the U.S. used Agent Orange in Vietnam to eradicate the foliage so that the Vietnamese had nowhere to hide. They're doing the exact same thing in Gaza, only they're doing it with people's homes and businesses, with human beings, living, breathing human beings inside these buildings, and just flattening. I highly recommend people look at those Financial Times article and the photos that they've included, and look on Telegram, look at these flattened areas that Israeli forces are operating. It's very different than the rubble that I think you will see in the inner parts of the city, and it is giving the advantage actually to the Israeli forces.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Very hard to imagine what's going on there. I was in communication with a reporter, a freelance journalist out of Gaza, and then I had to take a step back by seeing the messages she was putting on Twitter. Just absolute desperation. I will see if I can try to get some more correspondence from her, at a later date. Carl, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind people there's actually a lot of brave American journalists, American Jewish journalists, who are calling out the war crimes of Israel, the genocidal nature of the Israeli state. So we definitely should not confuse, Jews and Zionism as one entity. Many religious Jews don't even regard Israel as their state, because they as they say, they believe that's going against the scripture. And there are many Christian Zionists, like Angelo has pointed out, inside United States. They think by by the creation of Israel, by supporting Israel, they're actually hastening the second coming of the Christ, which is basically they're wishing for Armageddon. And they think all you gotta do is get all the Jews into this place, and then they all get wiped out, and then the Jesus will become. These people are crazy. Pompeo is one of them, and unfortunately we have these crazy people who are dictating our policies. And another thing about Gaza is a very small, narrow strip of land. So the area to operate in is very limited. So again, Brian is right. There's a lot less room to maneuver for the defenders of Gaza. And Israel definitely has this area fully surrounded. One of the places they cannot have the tunnels is the beach of Gaza, and that's where Israelis are advancing right now along the beach. So it will be tough. It will be tough for Hamas to pull any kind of surprise attacks on Israel, again, because Hamas, they're not quite at the same caliber as the Hezbollah of Lebanon. But again, we have to wait and see how Hezbollah will eventually respond to the Israeli ground invasion.
I mean, it's pretty disturbing photos. Brian, I will try to find those photos throughout the program here that you talked about.
I put the link in the private
great.
chat. I should have done that sooner.
No problem. I'm going to pull that up. I'll hand the mic over to you for 1 sec.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Brian just said before. I think there's 2 points. One is the military strategy, and I think time is is on the side of Israel. They can do a blockade. They have it's a prison, right? You control the whole prison. You can control everything. You can starve them. You can make their life very miserable, and just advance and keep on shelling. It's a sad reality. But I think what actually the last show of Alexander Mercouris is saying, it's something which is very true, which it's the political impact. I think every single day that passes, the whole public opinion is shifting. So I think there's still limited time for Israel to do this operation. They need to do something. So there are pros and cons. And the cons is actually, if you storm into Gaza, it's going to be, I think Israeli society is very risk averse in terms of human lives. And I think that would be a problem. So I don't know, how do you see it, Brian, in terms of the timing? I mean, the pros and cons, going fast towards going slowly, and the political impact too.
Yeah, well, I was listening to Alexander's discussion, and I agree with all of that. But what if, I think it's almost a rhetorical question. What if the regime in Israel right now is not interested in Israel's best interest? What if they're just like every other U.S. proxy around the globe, and they don't care about some spinning thing? Are we still connected? Okay. They don't care about Israel's self-preservation or the best interests of the people. They're going to push this forward. If this is something the leadership in Israel wants, and if this is something their U.S. backers want, even if it is contra to Israel's best interest overall, they may still decide to push forward with it anyway, just like the so-called spring counteroffensive that Ukraine conducted over the last 5 months.
Brian, we have the images up on the screen, I think.
Yes. So this is the article, and if you just keep scrolling down, the blue arrows are the advances of the Israeli forces. Just like Carl said, they're going along the coast and these relatively open areas, and anywhere where there is some sort of built structure, they just completely carpet bomb it. They bring in the bulldozers and they clear it out. And so what they're doing is they're creating open terrain where Israel has the advantage. We all know that in urban combat, the defender has the advantage. So what they're doing is they're just leveling it so that it's not urban terrain anymore. Extremely ruthless. These are potential Hamas fighting positions, not actual Hamas fighting positions. But this shouldn't surprise anyone, because the Israeli government openly admitted that they were going for maximum damage rather than precision. This is an open admission to conducting an indiscriminate bombing campaign. And if you just there's one very shocking photo where they do a before and after. It's kind of toward it's kind of toward the ends, and I see the images are kind of loading slowly.
Yeah, it's 1996 internet on this one here.
Just try going down a little further, because it's past it's past these images.
Okay,
you'll say destruction in the north. Destruction. It's past this one. Right here. Let's wait for this one to load.
Let's let that load for us.
Yeah, you can see how they carpet bombed an entire neighborhood. It's just craters. It looks like the surface of the moon. And that is not precision strikes targeting Hamas. That is just leveling Gaza so that there's nowhere for anyone to hide. And you're making it uninhabitable for the civilian population. It is blatantly a war crime. And people can't sit there and say, Israel has the right to defend itself. Look at what Hamas did. It was so bad. and then be okay with what Israel is doing right now. It's impossible. It's an impossible feat of mental gymnastics. It cannot be performed. And when people do it, they're basically surrendering any shred of principle that they might have. It's
Let me
loading
just try
quite
to
slow,
keep.
but
I'll leave it in the background here to load, and then we'll come back to it.
Can I add one thing about some history fact? After World War II, you had the Allies capture 1.5 million German soldiers, and what they did, they put them into open field camps, and actually they were not covered under the Geneva Conventions. It was like, I think they chose a term which was displaced soldiers. And what they did was they had no housing. So basically they were just on the floor, on the grass, humid grass, no toilets, no tents. And actually out of 1.5 million, 1 million soldiers died. And this is actually, you don't see much this into the history books, but if you search a little bit, there's a very good book called Other Losses by James Back, B-A-C-Q-U-E, and basically tells you about what they did. And I have my impression is that Israelis are actually going for this type of punishment. Basically, no housing is going to Gaza. If they cannot displace those people, it's going to be people living in tents every day, just living there with no basic necessities. So I think this is what, so this is the risk. So we need to look at, again, when you look at World War II, I'm not going to do some revisionism here, but a lot of things, there's a wise person said in World War II, there were two sides were butchers. The only difference is that you had a butcher that was more skillful than the other butcher. And what happens is that, as we all know, whoever wins writes history. So I'm not saying that Hitler was extremely evil, but I think, again, most people, they learn history through Hollywood, and I think what is deplorable is starting wars on the first place. After, I think it can turn into a vicious circle, and people it's dehumanization. That's what we see these days. We see prisoners treated like animals, and actually they're describing on TV, you see on Israeli TV, they're describing 2.2 million as being terrorists, as being animals, as being beasts on TV. And what saddens me is that the collective West, is siding with this. There's no denunciation. There's no one speaking out. How many countries are actually speaking out these days? I'm talking about Europe, the collective West. I've seen only Spain that actually said, well, you are going too far. But otherwise, it's just a bit of lip service. That's all. And I have the impression there's a tacit agreement from the collective West to accept what we are living, which is one of the biggest crimes against humanity since, ironically, the Holocaust. And I think there's also an irony here. So many parallels. Gaza reminds me of the Warsaw Ghetto. Israelis are actually claiming, they are suggesting that they should gas the, those places where the Hamas is. They call them subhumans. There's so many parallels that actually makes you think, well, you are inflicting to the Palestinians what you were inflicted in World War II. Couldn't you do better? There's so much parallel. And additional to that, it's a Zionist is very similar to that ideology you had in Germany after World War II, which I will not name, so you don't have it strike on your channel.
Brian, here's the photo for you.
Yeah, so was I exaggerating when I said it looks like the surface of the moon, or that this is indiscriminate bombing? Does that look like precision bombing? Every structure on that block has been completely destroyed, and there really isn't that much. When they're destroying structures in this fashion, there really is nothing left for Hamas or any other fighters to use as cover. And this is their plan. This is their plan to just level everything as they're moving forward. This gives them the ability to operate with large fields of fire, where their longer range weapons have the advantage over anything that Hamas might have in their arsenal. And so this is the approach. And it's going to take them much longer. This differs from other operations. I mean, of course, in previous operations, they also leveled entire neighborhoods. So that's not in that sense, but in the sense that the ground operation is going to be much more incremental and methodical than it has in the past, where they tried to storm in and overrun Hamas. In this case, it looks like they're preparing the ground to wait Hamas out and clear out potential battlegrounds of any cover Hamas might use. And like I said, just as they did in Vietnam with Agent Orange, they're doing this in Gaza, which is an urban landscape, and they're just destroying all the built structures in it with the people inside.
Just devastating, absolutely devastating. Wow.
And this is the Financial Times. It's not like Russian, Chinese media, some pro-Palestinian media organization. It's the Financial Times publishing these photos.
Unbelievable. Really, really unbelievable. Gentlemen, let's switch over to the Ukraine before we end off our conversation tonight. Latest updates in that area. Any of you can take the mic. And I guess the only one that's upset really is Zelensky, because he's lost the headlines now. He's out of the headlines. He's no longer the poster boy for worldwide victims. So he's needing some friends. What does he do in this situation? Does he wait for the FedEx package of 60 billion? Or does he take door number 2 and risk it? Anybody want to take the mic for that?
Zelensky wasn't allowed to visit Israel. They're like, no, you're not allowed to take the spotlight away from us. You know, what do you think you're doing? Nobody. I mean, it's sad. It's like the Times cover for Zelensky. That was really something. This happened in a matter of a month. You know, I remember just a few months ago, they're still talking about on Twitter Spaces, talking about going all the way to Moscow, dethrone Putin, partition Russia, and now Ukraine is afterthought. Like, what Ukraine? Look at all these people with flags in their profile. A lot of the Ukraine flags are fast disappearing from Twitter.
And well, we've seen them. We've seen Israel's flags fast disappearing from China e-commerce websites too. So quite interesting.
And to expand on what's going on in Ukraine, I mean, what happened is at the 5-month mark, Ukraine's offensive demonstrably failed. Ukraine even announced an operational pause, which is just a euphemism for it failed and it's over. And they've even began moving some of these brigades created specifically for the offensive. Now they're moving them to Avdiivka, which is a heavily fortified city outside of Donetsk City. This is where one of the places they have been shelling the civilian population of Donetsk from for about a decade now. And Russia is in the process of encircling it. And once they encircle it, again, it is heavily fortified. They have tunnels underground, but once they cut off the supplies going in and out, it's just a waiting game. It's inevitable that it will fall. And unlike Israel, Russia has huge amounts of weaponry and ammunition. They have a massive military-industrial base. They can produce enough artillery to just continuously pound places like Avdiivka, basically indefinitely. There really is no limit to that. They have enough guns, enough ammunition, and Ukraine does not. And its Western sponsors do not. Now, what does President Zelensky and the rest of the client regime in Kiev do? What do? They should have just looked at history and the outcome of every other proxy war the U.S. has ever fought and the fate of everyone who participated in it and signed up for it. And so his best option would be to disappear. That would be the smartest thing for him to do. But I don't think that he'll do that. Not yet. And I think other U.S. proxies, the administration in Taipei should be taking notes. The Philippines, they should be taking notes. They're not going to survive because they're special, the exact same thing will be done to them in their country. So I hope that, as horrible as the losses have been for Ukraine, that someone somewhere learns something so that this does not have to happen again, at least not in the near future. That's what I would hope. And what Russia is going to continue to do now is put pressure all along the line of contact, which is basically what they have been doing. And they'll just keep doing that until cracks appear. At the same time, they're putting pressure on the line of contact. They're continuing their strikes deep within Ukrainian territory using drones. Cruise missiles have kind of trailed off. So it appears they're saving that up for a massive salvo. They will use that to overwhelm air defense in probably very well protected areas, the places where the remainder of Ukraine's air defenses are postured. They'll probably be saving that to overwhelm and eradicate that. And they'll just keep pushing until there's a catastrophic collapse of Ukrainian fighting capacity. Then people talk about Russian big arrow offensives. You will not see that until you see a general collapse of Ukraine's fighting capacity. So that could take months or longer. It's again, Russia has been incredibly patient. People want to see developments unfold quickly. In reality, it doesn't work that way. People have to be patient. Russia has been infinitely patient. China has been infinitely patient in regards to, say, Taiwan and U.S. efforts to turn the region against China. They have been infinitely patient. That patience is already starting to pay off.
Well, I mean, that is definitely how I think of the same region issues here. What I want to add to that, Brian, the waiting game. Is this going to be the strategy that Hamas does in this Israeli situation? Are they going to sit back here now and say, okay, let's see what happens over the next couple of weeks? Or are they eventually going to get in there? Is there something deeper planned in this region? Because we saw the initial, October 7th offensive, of course. Is there something sitting in the winds here that could happen in that region? I just have this feeling that we all might be a bit complacent here, thinking that this is just going to cool down, or it's going to blow over. Israel's going to do their thing. They'll do them, and America will do whatever. But I just think that there is something deeper here, because to plan something like that, of course they expected a massive response, but is there going to be a counter offensive to that now?
Well, again, remember Hamas's origins. Remember their most recent history, fighting alongside U.S. armed and backed proxies in Syria. And so they're making decisions. I talked about the Israeli regime not making decisions in Israel's best interest. The same could be said about Hamas in terms of the Palestinian cause to a large degree. And now they have a number of their fighters being encircled by Israeli forces. Israel will be the one playing the waiting game, just like Russia around Avdiivka and other cities that Russia has encircled in the past. It will be up to Israel to either withdraw, as they have in previous operations, and just have caused this minimal damage, which, as you can see, is catastrophic damage and huge losses of human life, or are they going to pay the price in terms of manpower and equipment to finally clear northern Gaza and prevent Palestinian people from returning? That is the question. That's what we have to wait and see. And is Israel going to buckle in terms of logistics and military losses? Will political backlash put a limit on this operation, or will they be able to carry it out to completion? They're doing it at a much slower tempo that they think may possibly prevent political backlash from developing at least too quickly. And in terms of other players in the region, they know the U.S. is trying to provoke them. They know ultimately there's a high likelihood of the U.S. striking them. Like I said, for them strategically and in the long term, for the entire region's best interest, forcing the U.S. to come to them is going to give them the advantage over the U.S. So I think if they, especially Hezbollah, if they were to come out from their defenses to try to engage with Israel on Israel's terms, that would be a huge mistake.
I Okay, I maybe beg to differ a little bit from Brian. Russia can afford to carry out its operation in Ukraine methodically because Russia is a huge country with a lot of resources. Israel, I don't know Israel has what it takes to carry out a long protracted campaign because I mean, how much stocks in ammunitions and supplies do they have in store to drag this thing out for a month? Of course, U.S. is other factor. U.S. is always stand ready to supply Israel with whatever it needs. But currently, with U.S. already been stretched to the limit in the Ukraine war, how much spare capacity do they have to continue to supply Israel? That's my question.
Yeah, it's a good question too. And the problem for, say, the Palestinian people, they don't, for Russia, they need to have this colossal military industrial output to continue their methodical operations in Ukraine because it's a huge line of contact. Israel had a formidable military before the special military operation began. The U.S. and the rest of NATO poured weapons and ammunition into Ukraine to keep it going. Israel does not need the same level of armaments that Russia has because they're just talking about northern Gaza, which is about double the size of Fallujah. And they've mobilized their entire military basically to focus on northern Gaza. This is the unfortunate part for the Palestinian people. Hamas does not have artillery and other long-range weapons that will force Israel to expend a certain amount of artillery and other long-range munitions like Russia and Ukraine have to do in that conflict. So the dynamics are very different. Israel does have a significant military industrial base. They make their own artillery shells, for example. I think the calculation was 500 rounds a day, something like that. So if you create a cordon around northern Gaza and you build defenses and you're able to fire at least 500 rounds a day, every single day, pretty much indefinitely, I mean, I don't see what Hamas could do in that case if they decide to wait them out. All the previous operations had been Israel attempting to storm into different parts of Gaza and get the operation over quickly, and then there were losses that mounted, and there was a very short period of time, a very huge expenditure of munitions, and then they ran into the limitations. This time, it looks like they're trying to pace themselves. I would say they're still going to cut it very, very close, which is why it is a possibility that the U.S. is there just to discourage anyone from entering into the fray, say Hezbollah or some other actor in the region. So these are all things so I'm not saying it's for sure they will, but I'm just saying it looks like they're pacing themselves for a long-term campaign, and they do have the military power to do that, but it will be cutting it close.
Not only cutting it close, but the fact that they have to call up the reserves and send the ground troops in, it's going to be a drag on the Israeli economy. And Israel realized that also. Provided, of course, U.S. can just continue to print unlimited amount of money and then supply it to Israel. Like Alex, I'll disagree with you. One point you said something about use taxpayers' money. U.S. doesn't even have to use a taxpayers' money. They just print it. And now,
but Carl, it eventually goes into this. The U.S.
It is a tax because inflation is a tax. I agree. I mean, yes. I mean the money first gets to all the freaking people with the connections, right?
I get it,
but
the U.S. taxpayer is going to know in about 18 months. And somebody said to me the other day about this. They said, Alex, you have to understand the mortgage industry in the United States. Okay, most countries around the world don't have a 30-year fixed mortgage. Most don't. Okay, America may have 30 years, but think about it. 30-year interest rate at what, 7, 8, or 9%? I mean, just calculate that. How many times you got to pay for that home over and over and over and over before you actually pay down the principal. This is going to show up on the markets, in the housing market, the commercial real estate market. 12 to 18 months from now, there's going to be a big Fed decision today. The FOMC is meeting today, and they will come out with their whether they're going to leave rates flat or bump it up another quarter. This is a huge amount of money that is going to be moved here in the next 18 months. This is going to come out. This trade, I call it, this 13 or 14 consecutive rate increases, that's going to come out somewhere. And you can look at housing prices across the United States. There's 10 states that are in real trouble. Some houses that have been marked down 10 to 15 to even 20%. That, I call it a trade because there's going to be a winner on the other side of it. But that trade's got to come out of the market somewhere. And when you have most of the Americans that have their portfolio in stocks, their portfolio in homes, it can happen. So there is going to be, sure, Americans can print all the money they want, but there's going to be Judgment Day, and that money's going to have to be paid back, and it's going to come out somewhere. It's going to come out in the housing market. If it doesn't, it's going to come out. I quoted natural gas would hit $3.50 a handle. It did yesterday. I mean, that gets up to 4.5, 5. People are really, really, really screwed. Okay, so yes. To answer your question, Carl, it is free money for the government when they're going to spend $877 billion in the next 90 days. But that is going to come back. And hey, maybe this is the best time for them to get into that wartime economy, because they're going to need some excuse to talk about what's going to happen, because it is going to be catastrophic. So anyway, on to you.
That could be the inflection point, actually. That could be actually the moment that could change everything, the whole actions of the US, what they do with their money, especially in the defense. Self-introspection. You see, in 2008-9, who came at the rescue of the US was China. Next time there won't be any China, and next time might be like tenfold what happened last time. So maybe that could be the inflection point. I think what happened when it comes to BRICS, the global south, I think they are waiting for that moment. Mm-hmm. De-dollarization won't happen overnight. It is going to take time, maybe 5 to 10 years. So it's going to be a slow decline for the US. That decline will be translated into a higher and higher inflation. What happens with de-dollarization, you're not going to be able to print as freely money as before. It's going to be translated into high inflation. So degradation of purchasing power, life quality. People are getting poorer. Maybe what the world needs is maybe some kind of like financial crisis.
A reset.
But again, it is a reset. But again, I on the other side, I do not think that neither Russia or China they wish for that, because it's not in their interest either. Everybody is going to suffer from that.
You guys will see this chart that I'm bringing up on the program today. About 3 weeks ago, I was talking about this price spike increase in natural gas. Keep an eye on it. Many people say, who gives a shit, Alex, about natural gas? I'm going to tell you guys, this is one massive derivatives market, and they are big money into this. And this does change how countries operate their balance sheets. If that thing gets over 4.5, 5, you can see if we go back, I'm just going to go back a few years here, and just to spike on some years that there were problems. You can see in the year 2000, well, we had the dot-com boom, okay? We had some turbulence in the financial markets around 2005, and then there's the housing crisis right there when it hit 1335, okay? And now we are creeping on the way back up. Here's the, you could see 2022, that was Russia. And now, at any time, this could go crazy. This could go 750, 10, 1250. And if that goes up around those prices, guess what? Germany is not prepared because they bombed the bloody gas line. They have no way out on this. And that's why I keep making a point about natural gas, is because this, I think, could be, and what Angelo was saying, this could be the catalyst. This could be what people are expecting, or a good mask for America to say, well, we're in a war. Everybody's got to toughen up. Everybody's got to do their part to be a good taxpayer. Unfortunately, yeah, we have high interest rates. I mean, all the things are working against the average person that's trying to get ahead in this world right now. Fuel, electricity prices working against you. Mortgage prices working against you. Job market, not yet, but could work against you. Geopolitical climate, working against you. Man, oh man, I'm sure the people that are watching this program know exactly what I'm talking about. It is pretty damn difficult out there. Anyway, I'm going to pass this mic over to each gentleman here for the next few seconds, then we'll wrap up the show. We're going to start with Brian Berletic, because you always have amazing insights on what's going to happen geopolitically wise here in the next week or two. Then on to Angelo, on to Carl, and then we'll wrap it up. Over to you, Brian.
Well, I just want to thank you again for having me on, and it's always great to be on with Carl and Angelo. And I just want to remind people the most important thing to do when these conflicts break out and emotions are running high, before you think anything, before you say anything, just ask yourself, are you saying this because you're being emotional or because you have done the research and you are saying something that is rational and logical? And I remember very clearly in 2011 when the Arab Spring began, I was trying to warn everyone that it was engineered by the US. All the evidence was there. I looked up all the opposition groups, where they got their funding, what they had been doing the last 5 to 10 years. They'd all been working with the US State Department to prepare this. They'd also been working, the US had been working with militant groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood, other militant groups associated with Al-Qaeda, setting the stage for a reordering of the entire region, the North Africa, Middle East, the Arab world. They wanted to create a united front against Iran. They were ousting governments that may have been towing the line in other ways regarding U.S. foreign policy objectives in the region, but they refused to join a united front against Iran. Hosni Mubarak in Egypt was one of these leaders. They wanted him out. They got Mohammed Morsi from the Muslim Brotherhood in. And one of the first things he did was cut ties with Syria and encourage Egyptians to support the militants, the U.S. armed and sponsored militants attempting to overthrow Syria. And then he was thrown out in a military coup, and Egypt restored its ties with Syria. And so what my point is, people were so emotional at the beginning of the Arab Spring. They saw all these Arab people rising up, and they honestly believed, because the Western media was selling it as such, that this was an uprising against U.S. and Israeli-backed puppet regimes across the region. And that's what they wanted to believe, so that's all they saw when they looked at it. They refused to look at the facts. They refused to do the research. And that momentum, especially for people living in the region, that momentum helped advance U.S. foreign policy objectives in the region, not oppose them. And it resulted in the destruction of several nations. Libya completely destroyed, Syria partially destroyed, Yemen utterly devastated. And we still have the lingering impact of the Arab Spring right now in the region. The U.S. still occupies Syria. And that was part of it. They're still in Iraq. And much of this conflict that we're looking at today is a result of the order the U.S. created, or the disorder the U.S. created in the region. So my final parting thought is, let's all please just try to be rational. Everyone is emotional, including me. But I have to put that entirely aside. I need to know what is really going on, not what I wish was going on. What I wish was going on was that, yes, there's this resistance group that is going to defeat Israel and everything is going to work out fine for the Palestinians. But reality is a different story. We have to face it, no matter how unpleasant.
Well, thank you very much, Brian, and greatly appreciate it. I want to tell everybody that's watching this program tonight and that are watching it from my channel and everyone else's channel, the new Atlas, hit the subscribe button right away. Don't even hesitate. Do it now before we move on to Angelo. And also, we're welcoming Angelo's audience into the program today as well. Angelo is a voice of reason and definitely a gentleman that I really, truly enjoy having on this show. Angelo, over to you, and then we're on to Carl.
Well, let me correct you a little bit. You said the voice of reason. Not always. I think we learn from each other, and I think actually Brian is a great help. I can be like quite emotional, and I think there's two different messages. What we put on Twitter, it can be in a few lines. You can only do so much. And I think those episodes like today are very useful just to elaborate, because things are not what they seem. And I agree with what Brian just said just before. It's we have to put on the side the emotions, but also we shouldn't be blinded by the wishes. You know, the wishful thinking. We've seen it in what happened in Ukraine. The wishful thinking completely makes a distortion in the way we see things. So if it was for me, I wish so much that the Zionist movement would just collapse completely, because it's abnormal, it's an anachronism. You know, it shouldn't happen. And I wish so much that there was a liberation army that would just, make things right, just give back some decency, because it's about decency. They've been treated extremely badly for over 70 years. We need justice. We don't need revenge, but we need justice for those people. They need to be treated like decent human being, and it's atrocious. So, but the reality is very different. There's a term called realpolitik. In this term, especially right now, we are in a phase of transition. We shouldn't oversimplify things. Countries, they take actions for their national interest. If you say, well, Turkey, they're acting like this and that, and it doesn't seem right, well, you need to look at not only national interest, but the long-term game. So sometimes it seems like they are allies, and then, overnight things change, because countries are waiting for the right time. We saw it with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, it seemed like, well, this is a US puppet, and overnight we just realized that was about timing. So what the Global South, my impression is that the Global South BRICS, they need the right timing. When all the conditions are there, we'll do the transition. And they are rational. When you are rational, it means you are confident. What I see on the other side, we see a collective West, which is completely irrational and emotional. They are going with the strategy on a day-to-day basis, while we see on the other side something, BRICS movement with the Belt and Road Initiative, all those huge projects that are actually shaping the world of tomorrow. They are shaping for the next generation. They are shaping the world for the next centuries. So we need that transition. And what we need, most important, is actually get adults back on the table, because the West is not rational anymore. When I say the West, we are actually victim of that system. We have globalist elites that have hijacked our own democracies. We need to actually re-empower people in the West, and somehow have this transition to say, well, you know what? This colonial era is over. Now we need to work together and restore peace, restore peace. It's not, it's not about the 1% against the rest. It's about how we can make it a win-win, as the Chinese want. It's about win-win. It's about respecting each country's sovereignty, and how you can have mutual prosperity, because ultimately when we talk about ideology, we just mentioned before what do we want, what do we have in common. The four of us, we have one thing in common, and it is probably linked to the experience we have of living in Asia. There is an influence. We have one thing in common, is peace. It's about how we can actually shift from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, which would be beneficial for the whole world. And I think that's what ties us together. That's what the common point. And this, I would add one thing that a motto that Chinese have very often is very simple: look for what unites us and set aside the differences. And if we have this in mind, everything can be solved.
Well, thank you for that, Angelo. You mentioned multipolar. Well, that was kind of a bit of a conversation that Carl and I had on the Great Wall of China, where he wore his multipolar shirts. The walking and talking encyclopedia himself, Carl Zai, met face to face probably about 2 weeks ago. What an amazing opportunity it was for me to spend a couple of days with Carl. Greatly appreciated, and greatly appreciate you coming onto this program. I just want people to understand that there is a lot going on behind the scenes here. When you're hosting a show, there's comments, I can't even show you the cameras and lighting behind me, but to also host, sometimes I do lose my train of thought because I'm clicking a lot of buttons. And that just means that I need more of my team here when we go through these things. But let's move on to Carl. I just want to tell the audience once again, if you haven't heard of Carl, you need to hit that subscribe button as well. And of course, to Angelo, that was just on before me, Carl Zaw runs a channel on YouTube. He's very, very active, as well as some of these other gentlemen on Twitter as well. I'm going to hand it over to Carl. Carl, tell us what your thoughts are.
Well, I always appreciate opportunity to share the panel with Brian, Angelo, and you, Alex. And Brian always bring a very sobering and balanced analysis. Everybody should subscribe to New Atlas. It's great source on whether Ukraine war or the current conflict in the Middle East. And also Angelo, I always appreciate Angelo brings the passion into the conversation and his passion for justice. I like to end my remark on a note of hope. You know, U.S. at times the U.S. war machine seems omnipotent. You know, and the Central Intelligence Services that are like the agency are these evil geniuses. But if we look at the track record, most of the time U.S. end up sabotaging itself. You know, a lot of the problem the U.S. empire is facing right now is self-inflicted. You know, yes, it's true that the military-industrial complex just cares about making profit, perpetuating the forever war, but in the process, it's actually degrading the ability of the U.S. empire itself. You know, look at what happened as a result of Iraq and Afghanistan war. That made U.S. be attention focused on the Middle East, while China and Russia continue to grow as a counterbalance that is today. And now we're seeing that again in this new conflict. I like to remind people that not everything is inside the control of people or those so-called geniuses in Washington. You know, before this outbreak of the conflict, you have Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor to Biden, who is basically the foreign policy brain of the Biden administration, went on record of saying the Middle East is going through a relatively peaceful period right now, and we take credit for it. And you know, there's some little bit of tension in Gaza, but so far we have been put that under control. And the Sullivan is also behind the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. You know, this whole idea of creating an economic corridor that will link India through Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel. All that plan was supposed to counterbalance China's Belt and Road Initiative. Now that's dead in the water, right? This is something unexpected. And on the other hand, the Saudi-Iran détente that was brokered by China looks like to be solidifying. So there's a lot of opportunities. Actually, you know, there's a crisis. There's also opportunity. And right now, yes, Israel and United States do have the military upper hand, and tactically, Israel looks like faces no opposition, but the geopolitics in the Middle East has already gone through fundamental tectonic shift. The so-called Saudi-Israel rapprochement brokered by Washington, that's in shambles right now. You know, no Arab government is going to come out and say right now we stand behind Israel, and so there's hope. There's hope that the U.S. empire system is weakening through its own atrocious actions. You know, through the atrocious action in Gaza, for example. But it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable, and I believe in all our lifetimes, we will witness the crumbling of the U.S. empire. We're not talking about if, we're talking about when, right? I mean, it's when all these house of cards will just fall down. And Asia, like Angelo mentioned, does offer a hope for a better future. We have, there's been talk about Asian century, but when I moved to Asia in 2019, I realized the Asian century is already here. It's we just don't hear about it in the Western mainstream media, and the Belt and Road Initiative, BRICS Forum, they do offer a viable alternative to the U.S. dominated unipolar moment, and I think we do have a brighter future to look forward to. And on the specific issue of Palestine-Israel conflict, I think everybody understand outside the very selected bubbles in Washington and Tel Aviv that the long-term peace can only be solved if there's a creation of a Palestinian state where the Palestinian people are being treated with dignity and humanity. And the most urgent action right now is the push for ceasefire. And Russia and China has been doing that in the UN Security Council, and it's gaining a lot of support. Unfortunately, it's being vetoed by United States. This again, casts US in a very, very bad light, which it is a very brutal system. But it's ripping apart all the facade US put on itself, making itself seem the champion of human rights and all that. Now people can see clearly U.S. empire for what it is. It is a brutal system of exploitation at expenses of everyone. So my message of hope is time, patience. We will see the end of the U.S. empire in our lifetime.
Well, thank you for that, Carl. We have another story that's just up here before we end the show here. It was given to me by Angelo, if you want to talk about it. And I think that, and there was another link, or is this the right one?
Well, there's an announcement by IDF Telegram channel. There's very heavy casualties for the IDF in northern Gaza. They are talking about 15 dead so far. And I saw just the footage of in the Knesset, politicians like just crying because of the heavy casualties. So it is going to be difficult for IDF. Hamas is going to make it difficult.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
troubling
And
times.
here, and so here they talk about six tanks being hit. So again, it's not going to be. I think they have IDF. They have in front of them people that are not. They've lost everything. They've been, just put yourself into the shoes of Palestinians and people like in Hamas. They have nothing to lose. On the other side, you might have a different culture. Not necessarily. I wouldn't see all IDF soldiers being willing to die for Israel. And keep in mind, those are reservists. Those are not people, soldiers, all year long. They are civilians that can jump in. It's kind of a militia. They can jump into the army if there's any problem. So just imagine you being, working in a bakery shop, and overnight you have to fight Hamas. Hamas has been waiting for that moment. They're waiting for you, and they have nothing to lose. So they're going to make it difficult. Hamas is going to make it difficult for IDF.
Okay, last question. Anybody hear any news about Gonzalo Lira?
Unfortunately not. I'm pretty sure they had the kangaroo court trial, and he's probably rotting in prison somewhere right now. The U.S. State Department knows full well the charges were absurd. They published them. Everyone read them. It was utterly politically motivated. There was no law broken. He had opinions and stated things that are demonstrably fact, and that's why he's rotting in jail right now. That's the last that I heard. And the State Department is not going to do anything about it at all.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank everybody for coming on this program today. Be safe out there as well. Safe to Patrick Lancaster, who is reporting from that area as well. Hopefully we'll get him on the show soon as well. Gentlemen, once again, Carl Zaw, Angelo Giuliano, Brian Berletic of the New Atlas. What a pleasure it was to share the screen with you, gentlemen. You guys have an amazing week here, and we will talk to you guys soon. Everybody, take care.